Hi everyone. By now you should be about halfway through Unit 2. In this brief lecture I want to talk about a couple of concepts that need to be reviewed for this unit and talk about some issues that have been found in the Unit 2 test and also to remind you how to look for my comments on some assignments that might have low scores. So first take a look at the graph that you see on the screen. This is a basic supply and demand graph. You can see that X marks the spot right here where this is that perfect equilibrium price where quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. When we're looking at price controls, oftentimes these price controls are set by the government. So sometimes the government's trying to protect producers, sometimes they're trying to protect buyers. So when I think of price controls, I like to think of an upside down house. So if you see something marked as a price ceiling, it's going to be upside down. It's going to be below the equilibrium. If you see something marked as a price floor, it's going to be above the equilibrium. And the reason these are set up this way and called these things are explained by these little figures that you see here. So a price floor is set above the equilibrium, and it says, hello, I can step on the floor. So that means that as a seller, you can sell your good, say it's apples. If the government says that this price floor right here, let's say that it's set at $5, that means that the seller can sell their bushel of apples for $5, $5.25, $5.75, $6, $20, whatever they want. But they cannot sell their apples for anything below that price floor. This is set to help the producers, because if these price controls weren't in effect, the price would ultimately drop. It'd be forced to drop until you hit that equilibrium point. And so it'd be a lower cost or a lower price. Well, sometimes the government steps in, like with farmers, and will set a price floor, set it higher than the equilibrium. And that's to help protect them so that their selling price isn't quite so low. However, what does it create in the market? Well, it creates a surplus because here's our supply curve and here's the price floor price. If you go down to quantity, this quantity right here, let's say that's 20, and you go over here and hit the demand, let's say quantity demanded is 10, you have a surplus of 20 units. I'm sorry, 10 units, 20 minus 10. And so it creates this surplus, it creates excess, but it is put in place to help the producer or the seller. On the flip side of that, let's say that sometimes things are just selling for too high of a price and it's really hurting the buyer's side of things. So a great example of this is rent control. So in some cities, rent is so high that the government will instill rent control so that it keeps the cost lower for the consumer. So that's why it's called a price ceiling, because those renters then, those people that own apartment buildings for rent, they can charge, let's say that this is a different graph, let's pretend, and this is $400 a month. So they can rent their apartment for $400 a month, for $350, for $300, for $200, but they can't sell it, they can't rent it for anything above $400 a month. Well, that's great for buyers because it keeps the price low. However, it creates a shortage because quantity demanded right here is going to be high because there's lots of people that want to demand those apartments, but quantity supplied is going to be low because of that price. Sellers aren't going to want to sell. So they create inefficiency in the market. So you have a couple of test questions in which they'll ask you things, and some of the options are price floors and price ceilings. And I just wanted to clarify what those mean. So you've seen this before in effect of them charging prices that are higher than the equilibrium or charging prices that are lower than the equilibrium, but I'm not sure in the Krugman book if they actually refer to it in this chapter as price floors and price ceilings. It is addressed in detail in another chapter, but I don't believe in your lessons that it's assigned. So that'll kind of clarify that. Also in the Unit 2 test, there has been a mix-up on the free response questions. And last year this was a mix-up as well, and I tried to get it cleared up, but I don't think, obviously, that they were changed or adjusted per my request. request. So when you get to take that test, I have it highlighted, so before you even click on the test link, it tells you the order to work on those free response questions in. So that way you'll know you don't just go 17 through 20. They're in a slightly different order, and it'll make a lot more sense because for some of you, when you look at it, it's going to, the first one will say refer to number 2 when you create this graph, and you're like, there isn't a number 2, this is the first one. So this will kind of clarify that. I apologize for that confusion. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, make sure that you're checking back on assignments that you turn in that are graded by the computer. If there's not a free response question or an essay question, oftentimes the computers automatically grade those. And I do go back through them and I check those assignments that are below a 70%, and I do leave specific comments. So do check back periodically. Oftentimes, I'm not alerted when you turn in some of those assignments that are graded by the computer, so it might be a few days after you do it that I leave comments. But do check back because I will leave comments for that. And I have had a couple of students email me and say, hey, can you please go through the questions that I missed and explain them? And I'm happy to do that because obviously I'm not in the classroom with you. And sometimes it can be a little confusing. The wording can be confusing or the concepts can be confusing. I think my number one piece of advice in this unit is that you really do need to pay attention to those determinants of demand and supply because there are a ton of questions on it. And if you're looking at an assignment and it's asking you to graph something and it gives you a scenario in which a complement is involved, then you need to know that you're just going to be looking at changing the demand curve because that's a complement as a determinant of demand. It's not a determinant of supply. Determinants of supplies are things like costs of input price. So when minimum wage goes up, that might change the supply curve. And so that'll be looking at supply itself. So it's really important that you understand those determinants of supply and demand. They're explained in your book. They're also explained in the resources that I give you. Reffonomics is the best resource to go to. And I'm still getting used to the new format for it. They totally changed their website, and the content is the same, but they've organized it in a different way. So I'm still learning that as well. But so far, the basics that they have of demand and supply and explaining the difference between quantity demanded and demand, law of demand, and all those sorts of things, they're really helpful. And they have a lot of interactive things that can help you with understanding too. And of course, there's just a ton of different videos and stuff that you can watch. But most importantly, you need to read the book. And if you need an additional resource, especially if you plan on taking the AP test in the spring, then I would suggest that you go ahead and buy an AP exam, 5 steps to a 5 or College Board. I suggest that you go ahead and purchase one of those and use that as an additional resource as you're going through the units as well. So hopefully this was helpful clarifying a few things. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I will be happy to answer those for you. Thanks.